What would you do if your loyal dogs refused to cross a familiar field because they sensed a crime buried deep beneath your own land? Ava Carter had learned to love silence. After 15 years in the Marine Corps Special Operations Command, she'd traded the noise of war zones for the gentle rustle of pine trees and the morning breath of dew settling on her small farm in rural South Carolina. Her companions were Echo and Blitz, two retired military working dogs she had trained and fought alongside in Afghanistan. This land 5 acres of green pastures and a modest farmhouse wasn't just a home, it was her healing. Each morning followed the same rhythm. Up before dawn, 5-mile run with the dogs, coffee brewed strong, and time in the garden where tomatoes climbed in neat rows and collards spread wide like proud southern fans. Routine wasn't just comfort, it was survival, because even after medals and missions, Ava still fought a quieter war inside against memories, against nights that wouldn't let go. On this particular Tuesday, the day began no differently. Until it did. She was kneeling by a row of tomatoes, gloved hands brushing away dirt, when she felt the vibration. Not from the earth, but from her bones. A low rumble. Tires. Gravel. Too many. She looked up, sweat clinging to her brow. 3 police cruisers skidded to a halt at the edge of her gravel driveway. Then 2 more. Then a 6th. Lights flashing. No sirens. No announcement. Just force. Ava stood slowly, removing her gloves with practiced calm. Her heartbeat picked up, but her training kicked in. Control your breathing. Stand tall. Don't move suddenly. Don't give them a reason. Echo and Blitz were inside the house, resting after their run. She pressed a small button on her watch silent signal. Hold position. Stay alert. 6 officers emerged from the cars. They weren't local beat cops. They wore tactical vests over blue uniforms, their hands already resting too comfortably on their weapons. Leading them was a man Ava recognized from the town paper. Charles Whitmore, captain of the Willow Creek Police Department. A man with more misconduct complaints than commendations, and not one consequence. He was flanked by men who mirrored his posture, tight lips, wide stances, fingers itching near triggers. Whitmore's smirk barely masked the contempt in his eyes. "Mornin', Miss Carter," he said, his voice oozing condescension. "We need to have a word." Ava didn't flinch. "Good morning, officers," she replied evenly. "How can I help you?" "We received reports of suspicious activity on your property." Suspicious. That word again. The same one whispered in banks, muttered at farmers' markets, murmured behind steering wheels when a black woman didn't move fast enough. "I'd be happy to answer any questions," she said calmly. "But unless you have a warrant, I'll need you to remain off my property." Whitmore's jaw tightened. Behind him, the officers shifted formation tactically, deliberately spreading out. This wasn't a wellness check. It was a show of power. He stepped closer. "We don't need a warrant if we've got probable cause, multiple complaints, strange folks coming and going at odd hours." Ava nearly laughed. The only strange folks who'd visited lately were her old platoon buddy White, male, in a church van bringing bread and the local vet checking Echo's hip joint. She knew what this was. Harassment. Retaliation. She had filed a formal complaint against Whitmore 3 weeks ago. She'd recorded him roughing up a black teenager outside the grocery store. That footage was headed for the county review board. Now he was here, with backup and bad intentions. "Captain Whitmore," she said, her voice unwavering, "you know the Constitution as well as I do. You need a warrant or evidence of an emergency to enter private property. I see neither." His smile vanished. His eyes narrowed. Then he said it low, just for her. "Your kind always thinks you're special." The words hit like a slap. Not because she hadn't heard them before, but because she had. Too many times. Too many wars, only to come home and fight another. Ava's face remained neutral. She remembered her grandfather's words, Korean War vet, denied a loan because of his skin. They want your anger. Don't give it to them. Whitmore signaled. 2 officers peeled off toward her barn, another toward her shed. No warrant, she repeated, louder now. I do not consent to a search. They ignored her. One kicked over her basket of tomatoes, spilling red pulp into the dirt. Another flung open the shed door and began rummaging through her tools. It wasn't about finding anything. It was about provoking her, looking for an excuse, waiting for the wrong tone, the wrong movement, the resisting arrest they could justify. Ava stayed rooted, but her fingers moved subtly. She activated the audio recorder in her pocket. Backup plan number 1. Then she glanced at the house. Echo and Blitz were watching, invisible, but ready. Trained for this. Trained to protect. From insurgents, from IEDs, and now, from her own country's badge. Behind Whitmore, a younger officer looked uncomfortable. His name tag read Logan Pierce. He didn't move like the others, didn't scan her like a threat, didn't look proud of what was happening. A rookie, maybe, not fully broken in. Hope, maybe, but not help, not yet. Whitmore stepped closer, close enough she could smell his breath. Let me make this clear, he growled. You cooperate or we escalate. Ava tilted her chin slightly. She wasn't in Helmand province anymore, but it felt the same. Surrounded, outnumbered, misunderstood. She steadied her breath, because something inside her knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. And Echo and Blitz? They were listening, waiting. The command would come. Not yet, but soon. Ava Carter had faced down armed insurgents in Afghan villages. She had walked through mine-laced terrain with only Echo at her side and gut instinct as her map. But nothing about those missions felt as personal, as targeted, as this. This wasn't war. It was something colder, crueler. She stood still on her porch steps as Captain Charles Whitmore ordered his officers to take a look around. One peeled off toward her barn. Another circled toward the shed. A third stomped through her garden like it was enemy territory, snapping stalks of green beans, dragging a boot through collards she'd planted with care. Ava didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give them what they wanted. A reaction. I do not consent to a search of my property, she said loudly. No response. The silence from the officers was calculated. They weren't here for dialogue. They were here for domination. She looked over at the younger officer, Logan Pierce, still standing near the squad cars, not moving with the others. His hands hung awkwardly by his sides, not aggressive, not helpful either. Yet. Whitmore stepped closer again, his voice low, sharp as a knife. You think that uniform you wore overseas makes you better than the rest of us? Ava didn't answer. You think people care? You're not a hero here, Carter. You're a problem. There it was, the truth, finally spoken. He didn't see a veteran. He didn't see a decorated Marine. He saw a black woman with land he wanted and a mouth that wouldn't stay shut. And in his world, both were threats. Behind the barn, a rustle caught Ava's attention. She shifted slightly, careful not to be obvious. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw one of the officers, Delaney, if she remembered right, duck behind her shed. He looked around, then reached into his jacket. Her stomach dropped. He wasn't searching. He was planting. Her mind processed it all in seconds. This wasn't just harassment. It was a setup. They were going to find something. Drugs, most likely. Enough to smear her name and discredit the complaint. She had filed a formal grievance 3 weeks ago, backed with video. Whitmore roughing up a black teenager outside the grocery store. She hadn't thought he'd retaliate so boldly. But this was surgical. A strategic takedown. And if she wasn't who she was, if she didn't have Echo and Blitz, or the experience to read tactical patterns, she might never have seen it coming. Whitmore turned to bark another order. Check the house next. Ava stepped forward. You are not entering my home, she said firmly. That would be a constitutional violation, and I will defend my rights." Whitmore's smirk twitched, his mask slipping. "You threatening an officer, Miss Carter?" He raised his voice so the others could hear. "Sounds like she's threatening law enforcement, boys." Murmurs of agreement followed, an orchestrated response. Like a script, rehearsed in silence. They were building the case, boxing her in, making her the aggressor in a scene where she'd done nothing but stand still and quote the law. She didn't look at them. She looked to the house, a flicker of movement behind the curtains. Echo and Blitz, watching, still in position, still waiting, still dangerous but not yet deployed. Whitmore stepped closer, his breath foul with coffee and arrogance. He leaned in, voice low. "This town doesn't belong to people like you." Ava didn't respond. She didn't need to, because behind him the air changed. Gravel crunched under tires. A white van rolled into view. Channel 7 News. Naomi Blake stepped out, camera already perched on her shoulder, her voice clear and professional. "Good morning. We received a tip about police activity at this address. Would you be willing to comment on what's happening here?" Whitmore froze. He spun on his heel, jaw tight. "This is an active investigation. You need to leave." "We're on a public road," Naomi replied. "We're not interfering, just documenting." Ava's shoulders relaxed half an inch. The first shift in momentum, the presence of press, of eyes, of witnesses. Whitmore's voice dropped, but his tone grew darker. "This little stunt with the media won't save you." Ava didn't flinch. "There's nothing to be saved from, unless you count trespassing, unlawful search, and destruction of property." She didn't have to raise her voice. The truth carried its own volume. Whitmore's nostrils flared. He turned back toward the officers. "Search the house." Two began walking toward her front steps. Ava stepped directly in their path. "No further," she said. Her posture straightened. Her voice turned cold, clipped military command tone. "I've given you a lawful instruction. Do not cross this line." Whitmore was nearly red now. His fingers moved toward the snap on his holster. "Step aside or face arrest." Then another sound, a low chime in Ava's pocket. Her phone. Even with a cracked screen, it lit up with a name, Julian Carter, her attorney. She didn't pick up, but Whitmore noticed. His eyes narrowed. "Give me the phone." "No." He grabbed it, slammed it to the gravel. Crack. Screen shattered. Ava stared at the pieces, not with fear, but with something quieter, more dangerous. Resolve. "Oops," Whitmore sneered. "Careless with your things." Naomi caught it on camera. So did Ava's hidden security system. So did the backup drive streaming to the cloud. This wouldn't be swept under the rug. Not this time. Because Ava Carter hadn't survived IED blasts and sniper fire just to be broken by a man like Charles Whitmore. Nosh had built her life for moments like this. Moments where silence wasn't safety. Where standing still was the strongest move on the board. And just as Whitmore turned to bark another order, his plan unraveling, Logan Pierce finally moved. Not toward Ava, but toward his phone. His thumb slid across the screen. A message sent. A chain reaction triggered. Not just documentation, not just resistance, but activation. The system she helped create 3 years ago, Sentinel Protocol, was already alive in the background. And now it was awake. The wind shifted. Not in the air, but in Ava Carter's gut. That sixth sense all veterans carry, the one that warns you right before the ambush, before the trap springs shut. She had that feeling now. Not from the flashing lights, not from the shouts, but from what she saw out of the corner of her eye, behind the shed, behind the noise. Officer Delaney, one of Charles Whitmore's men, moved like he wasn't meant to be seen. Ava shifted just enough to watch without turning her head. He crouched low, pulled something from his jacket, small, silver-wrapped, discreet, and slipped it into a plastic storage bin. Then he stood, and casually walked back toward the others. Her stomach turned to lead. They were planting evidence. She'd suspected it. Now she knew. The raid wasn't about a search, it was a cover. A performance for body cams with a very real goal: discredit her, frame her, destroy the one thing they couldn't control: her voice. Ava's hand moved into her pocket, where her security system's backup key rested. She clicked it once. Footage from the camera behind the shed now, uploading to 3 separate cloud servers. Another layer of protection. Another weapon they couldn't see. Whitmore didn't notice. He was too busy scowling at Naomi Blake, the Channel 7 reporter, who had just repositioned for a better shot. "You're interfering with a police investigation," he barked. She didn't blink. "I'm filming from a public road, Captain. That's protected by the First Amendment." He sent 2 officers to try and block her view. She stepped back just enough to stay legal, camera still rolling, microphone still live. Ava watched the entire scene with the focus of a soldier scanning a kill zone. She didn't move. She didn't interrupt. She waited. Because she knew something Whitmore didn't. She wasn't alone anymore. The moment Delaney planted that silver packet, her security system triggered a silent alert. Sentinel protocol. Activated. A veteran-led network, encrypted and underground, built after the death of Malik Johnson, a fellow Marine who'd been killed by police during a routine stop. That loss had sparked a movement. Not protests. Preparation. Veterans from every branch had banded together to create a safety net designed specifically for people like Ava. People trained to survive war, but still hunted at home. And now, that net was moving. The first response came 12 minutes later. 2 pickup trucks appeared at the end of her long driveway, just beyond the reach of flashing red and blue. Inside were former service members, local veterans Ava recognized from support group meetings, VA clinics, and midnight phone calls about panic attacks and lost limbs. They didn't exit their vehicles, didn't confront. They just watched. A silent show of presence. Charles Whitmore saw them too, and his body stiffened. He didn't recognize their faces, but he knew the look. Veterans move differently. They carry weight not in their muscles, but in their silence. And Whitmore knew enough to be nervous. He turned toward Ava again, voice low, tight. "You think calling in a crowd is gonna save you?" "I didn't call a crowd," Ava replied. "I called the truth." His lip curled. "What do you think people'll say when we find what we're looking for?" She took a breath. "Do it," she said. "Open the shed." He blinked. "You're giving permission now?" "No," she replied, "but I want you to open it anyway. I want your fingerprints on it. I want you to be the one holding the bag when this goes to federal court." For a moment, just a breath, Whitmore looked unsure. Then he covered it with bluster. Boyce checked the shed. 2 officers turned toward the structure, one of them Delaney, already looking a little too eager. From behind the shed, Echo let out a soft, calculated bark. Not aggressive, not scared. Just a signal. Ava's eyes didn't move, but her mind clicked. The dogs knew. They could smell it. Foreign object. Recently placed. Human scent. Threat level, high. Naomi stepped closer, calling out just loud enough. "Miss Carter, can you confirm for the record that you believe officers planted evidence on your property?" Whitmore whirled on her. No comment. But Ava held her ground. "I don't just believe it. I witnessed it, and my security system recorded it." That hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke. Thena Cruiser arrived. Not Whitmore's. Sheriff Richard Cole. County jurisdiction. Senior authority. The man who hadn't answered Whitmore's calls for weeks, and the man who Ava hadn't reported for misconduct. Cole stepped out slowly, surveyed the scene, the trampled garden, the gathered crowd, the tense standoff, and walked straight toward Ava. "Miss Carter," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I received an alert about potential misconduct." Whitmore stepped in fast. "She's obstructing a police investigation, Sheriff." Cole's gaze didn't shift. "Do you have a warrant?" Whitmore hesitated. "We have probable cause." "I didn't ask for probable. I asked for paperwork." No response. Cole turned back to Ava. "Would you like to speak in private?" Before Ava could answer, her phone buzzed again, even with the screen cracked. It was Julian Carter, her lawyer. She held it up. "I'm about to. My attorney's en route with the county prosecutor. They'll want to see the shed too." Behind her, Echo moved into a new position, flanking left. Alert. The signal was clear. Something was about to happen. And this time, the system wasn't going to cover it up, because too many eyes were watching, too many cameras were rolling, too many veterans were arriving. This wasn't a setup anymore. This was a siege, and the tide was turning. The tension on Ava Carter's porch was so thick, it felt like humidity, heavy, oppressive, clinging to every breath. The shed door creaked open. 2 officers stepped inside. From her vantage point, Ava couldn't see them. But she didn't need to. She already knew what they'd find. A plastic packet. Too clean. Too convenient. Too freshly planted. Naomi Blake, standing just off the driveway, kept her camera rolling, eyes sharp behind the lens. Sheriff Richard Cole stood nearby, watching, not interfering, but registering every movement, every word. And Whitmore? He was pacing, like a wolf circling wounded prey, except he was the one starting to sweat. Ava didn't move, but her mind was racing. Every second that passed brought her closer to a line between restraint and response. She'd held back. She'd followed the law. She had the footage, the witnesses, but Whitmore wasn't backing off. And now, he was about to cross into her home. "I'm entering the house," one of the officers said, turning from the shed. Ava stepped forward. "No, you are not." Whitmore raised his voice. "You gonna stop him?" "That'll be obstruction. You want to go to jail for interfering with a lawful search?" "You have no warrant," Ava said firmly. "You're violating the Constitution." "That's enough," Whitmore snapped. "Boys, secure the house. If she resists, detain her." Ava looked him in the eyes. No fear. Just a long, steady calm that came from experience. And then she whistled, short, sharp. Command tone. The sound was meaningless to most, but not to the 2 figures waiting inside the house. There was a beat of silence. Then the front door opened, and out they came, Echo and Blitz. Tactical vests strapped tight, black Kevlar, patches with insignia Ava had sewn herself, Marine Special Operations Command. Echo, smaller, moved to Ava's right, amber eyes scanning, analyzing. Blitz, heavier, muscular, took position front and center directly between Ava and the officers. No barking, no growling, just intention. They weren't house pets. They were assets, military-trained, battle-proven. Obedient to one voice only, and that voice was Ava Carter's. The entire scene froze. Hands drifted to weapons. Officers tensed. One even stepped backward without meaning to. Whitmore's bravado cracked. "What the hell is this?" "My dogs," Ava said calmly. "Echo, Blitz, hold." Both dogs stopped instantly, unblinking, focused, like shadows carved from purpose. "These animals are trained federal assets," Ava continued. "They've served in 3 combat zones. Echo is scent response and perimeter intelligence. Blitz is tactical. They respond to over 100 verbal and non-verbal commands." Behind Whitmore, Logan Pierce's eyes widened. He recognized the insignia and the way they moved. "They're military working dogs," he said quietly. "Special ops." The words rippled through the officers like cold water. Military working dogs weren't canines from a police academy. They were classified as equipment in combat zones. capable of clearing a building, taking down an armed suspect, identifying explosives, and doing it without hesitation. Whitmore's lip curled again, but this time it was forced. "Control your damn animals." "They're not attacking," Ava replied. "They're in a defensive posture. That's legal. Just like my fence. Just like my cameras." He stepped closer. "Call them off." Ava didn't budge. "Echo, Blitz, stand ground." The dogs remained where they were, alert, ready. Their presence changed everything. No longer was Ava outnumbered. Now the standoff had balance. No longer just words and cameras, now capability. "You think this intimidates us?" Whitmore snapped. "No," Ava said quietly. "I think it reminds you I'm not powerless." Another car pulled in. Julian Carter, her attorney, stepped out, phone in one hand, court documents in the other. He walked straight to the sheriff. "I've filed an injunction," he said. "Any further action on this property is subject to federal review, and there's more." He lowered his voice, but Ava caught it. "They planted evidence. We have footage." "It's already with the county prosecutor." Sheriff Cole looked over at Whitmore. "Is that true?" Whitmore didn't answer. Ava did. "Check the shed. There's a silver packet, still has fresh fingerprints on it." "Footage shows Officer Delaney placing it there." Logan Pierce swallowed hard, then took a step forward. "She's telling the truth," he said. The air went still. Whitmore stared at him. "You sure you want to do this, son?" Logan's voice cracked at first, but steadied. "I didn't sign up for this kind of policing." Ava felt a shift. It wasn't total, but it was beginning. A fracture. And fractures break walls. Naomi moved closer, camera rolling. "Captain Whitmore," she said, "do you want to comment on the allegations that your officers planted evidence on a veteran's property?" No answer. Just silence. Then tires on gravel. More headlights. This time, it wasn't reporters. It was more trucks. More veterans. Men and women Ava knew by face, if not by name. Some limping, some scarred, some still wearing pieces of uniforms under civilian shirts. They parked respectfully, not interfering, but present. Witnesses, watchers, protection. Whitmore turned, voice low. "This isn't over." Ava looked him in the eye. "No, it's just beginning." Behind her, Echo scanned left. Blitz flared nostrils once. Still, ready. The message was clear. "You're not welcome here. And this time, we're not afraid of you." The moment Echo and Blitz took their defensive positions, something in the air shifted, not just tension, but power. Ava Carter stood tall between her dogs, unshaken. Behind her, the morning light filtered through pine trees, casting long shadows across the dirt driveway where the past and present collided in an uneasy standoff. Captain Charles Whitmore's voice cracked as he tried to reclaim control. "This is intimidation. You're threatening law enforcement with attack dogs." Logan Pierce, the rookie officer, spoke up before Ava could. "Sir, with all due respect, that's not what's happening." Everyone turned toward him. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of the lies. "We came here with no warrant," Logan continued. "We're trampling her land. We're yelling at a veteran on her own porch. And now we're accusing her of being a threat because she brought out 2 dogs that haven't moved a muscle without her say-so." A beat of silence followed. Even the other officers shifted uncomfortably. Sheriff Richard Cole took a slow step forward. "Captain Whitmore," he said evenly, "is there any official documentation for this operation? Probable cause, written reports, warrants, anything?" Whitmore opened his mouth, then closed it. Julian Carter, Ava's attorney, held up a printed document. "This is an emergency motion just filed in district court. It includes photographic evidence, security footage, and time-stamped logs
showing Officer Delaney placing an unmarked packet in Miss Carter's shed.
The footage is already in the hands of the county prosecutor. Sheriff Cole turned to Whitmore again. Did your men plant evidence on this property? I don't know what she's talking about, Whitmore muttered, but his voice lacked the weight it had earlier, and the look in his eyes wasn't power. It was panic. Before he could say more, Naomi Blake raised her voice from the side of the driveway. Miss Carter, can you confirm you have documentation of what happened here today? Ava didn't hesitate. Yes. My security system recorded multiple angles. The footage is being automatically uploaded and live-streamed to a secure server. It includes audio, timestamps, and facial recognition overlays. None of this will be buried. Whitmore's face twisted. He looked at Logan. You going to stand there and let this happen? Logan glanced at Ava, then at the camera, then back at Whitmore. I am. Naomi took a step closer. Officer Pierce, would you be willing to make an official statement on what you saw today? I will, he said. But not just about today. Everyone froze again. Even Ava tilted her head slightly. Logan inhaled deeply. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. There have been other operations targeting people who own land around the proposed resort site, mostly minorities, mostly folks who can't fight back. I didn't say anything before because he looked down, because I was afraid. No one spoke. Even Blitz lowered his head slightly, sensing the shift in energy. Ava broke the silence. You're not the first to be afraid, she said quietly. But you might be the first to speak. Sheriff Cole gave a slow nod, then turned toward his vehicle. He pulled out his radio. This is Sheriff Cole. I need backup units to secure this location as a potential crime scene. No one enters or exits the property without my authorization. Repeat, this is a sealed scene pending investigation. Whitmore stepped forward, desperate now. This is my jurisdiction. Not anymore, the sheriff said, without looking at him. Julian added, the federal government has also been notified. Given Ava Carter's military background and the potential violation of her civil rights, federal jurisdiction applies. The final nail. Whitmore didn't explode. He deflated. He looked around and realized for the first time he had no control left. He turned back toward his cruiser. This isn't over, he muttered, but even that felt hollow, and no one followed him. One by one, his officers stepped back, no longer sure whose side they were really on. Naomi zoomed in on his retreating back, then panned toward Ava. You stood your ground, she said softly. Ava nodded. It wasn't just for me. She looked over her shoulder at Echo, at Blitz, at the veterans parked at the edge of the road. And it's not just over yet. Within 20 minutes, more deputies arrived. 2 agents from the district attorney's office followed. They asked questions. They took statements. They examined the shed and lifted the planted packet with gloved hands. Sheriff Cole made sure a chain of custody was established immediately. Julian Carter stayed close to Ava, fielding calls from news outlets and other attorneys. Naomi Blake had already begun preparing her report for the evening broadcast. But for Ava, the chaos blurred into silence. She stood back in her garden, eyes on the crushed tomatoes, boot prints still visible in the dirt, the smell of broken soil lingering, and yet, beneath that, she felt something grow, not revenge, not even victory, but validation. All her training, her silence, her pain, it hadn't been wasted, and most of all, she hadn't stood alone. The Sentinel Protocol had activated, just as intended. The veterans who had come weren't carrying signs or weapons. They didn't need to. Their presence spoke louder than any protest. We protect our own. We protect truth. We protect justice. Blitz pressed gently against her thigh. Echo sat, still facing the sheet ever vigilant. You did good, Ava whispered, to both of them, and maybe to herself, because what had started as another act of aggression had become the beginning of exposure, and soon, accountability.
As law enforcement agents combed Ava Carter's property, a deeper truth began to surface, one that stretched beyond her fence line and far beyond Charles Whitmore's authority. It started with a whispered sentence from Officer Logan Pierce, quietly speaking to Sheriff Richard Cole near the edge of the garden. This wasn't about her. It was about her land. The sheriff paused, brows tightening. "What do you mean?" Logan's voice dropped even lower. "There's been pressure coming from the top, from Police Chief Raymond Ellis, to make certain property owners uncomfortable. Mostly black landowners, mostly near the resort site." Ava overheard just enough to freeze. She turned, slowly, and looked at Logan. "You're talking about the Pine River project?" Logan nodded. "That luxury resort they're planning. The investors don't want headlines. They want clean land, marketable land, and Ellis is related to one of the developers. His brother-in-law." Ava's jaw tensed. The pieces began to snap together with terrifying clarity. The surveillance, the harassment, the attempt to discredit her. It was never personal. It was business. Julian Carter stepped in, having caught the tail end of the conversation. "We need sworn statements," he said. "Right now." Logan hesitated, then looked Ava in the eye. "I'll do it." That moment shifted everything again, because now it wasn't just a bad cop with a grudge. It was a whistleblower inside the system saying what Ava had suspected for years, that law enforcement had been weaponized, not to protect, but to profit. Sheriff Cole took immediate action. He ordered a freeze on all current investigations and citations related to the properties surrounding the resort area. Naomi Blake, still filming from the driveway, turned toward her producer in the news van. "We're going statewide with this," she said. "Tonight." And then the floodgates opened. Other property owners began showing up, neighbors Ava barely knew. Black farmers, elderly women, single parents, each of them with stories of random inspections, of mysteriously denied permits, of being followed on back roads at night. They said I had code violations, but wouldn't tell me what. They told my grandson he couldn't park his truck on his own land. One officer said, "You're lucky you're not locked up yet." Ava listened to every word, and the more she heard, the angrier she became. This wasn't about her reputation anymore. This was about generations of people being slowly pushed off land they'd worked for decades. And now, with cameras rolling, attorneys present, and federal agents on alert, they were finally being heard. Inside the shed, investigators had finished dusting for fingerprints. As expected, the packet Whitmore's men planted had only 2 sets of prints. One matched Officer Delaney. The other, not Ava's, not anyone in the household, just Delaney and another officer caught red-handed. Julian looked at Ava. "You know what this means, right?" She nodded. "It means they lost." But even as she said it, Ava knew the fight wasn't over. Not really. Men like Whitmore didn't fold after one loss. They regrouped. They retaliated. But this time she had reinforcements, because something else had started forming on the edge of her property. Something quiet, but powerful. Veterans, dozens now, sitting in their trucks, standing with arms crossed, sipping coffee from old canteens, watching, waiting, no weapons, just presence, just witnesses. Ava walked slowly to the edge of her yard and looked at them. A few nodded in silent greeting, some she'd trained with, others she'd only met online through Sentinel protocol. But now they were here, not for violence, but to ensure the truth wouldn't disappear. Not this time. And standing there with Blitz at her side and Echo scanning the tree line, Ava Carter made a quiet vow. They wanted my land. They tried to take my voice. Now I'll use both to make sure this never happens again. Because this wasn't just a story about one veteran. It was a story about land, power, race, and truth. And in Willow Creek, the truth was finally rising to the surface. The sun had set over Ava Carter's farm, but her mind was wide awake. Despite the media exposure, the sealed crime scene, and the federal attention now circling Willow Creek, Ava knew it wasn't over. People like Charles Whitmore didn't go quietly. They didn't apologize. They eliminated threats. She lay in bed, lights off, watching the soft flicker of the motion sensors on her tablet screen. Echo and Blitz were already on high alert, trained to rest lightly and move silently. Outside, Sentinel veterans rotated watch shifts. One truck faced the road. Another covered the back fields. A third sat near the shed. It looked peaceful, but Ava had seen this before in combat, right before the ambush. Around 2:00 a.m., Echo's ears perked up first. No bark. Just a subtle shift. Then Blitz lifted his head, tense, but still. Ava whispered a single phrase. Alert status. Both dogs rose without sound. She reached for her night vision tablet and scanned the perimeter cameras. Their movement near the tree line. 5 figures. Dark clothing. Gloved hands. No police cruisers. No body cams. One carried what looked like a gasoline can. Another held a crowbar. They moved in tactical formation. Fast. Coordinated. They weren't just thugs. They'd been trained. Ava's pulse slowed, not from fear, but from focus. She recognized the lead man's build, even in low light. Charles Whitmore, flanked by Officer Delaney and 3 others, likely hired muscle. This wasn't just intimidation. It was a hit. Destroy the house. Frame it as an accident. Make the security footage disappear. And eliminate the woman who exposed everything. Ava didn't hesitate. She activated the sprinkler system to disrupt the accelerant. Then she sent an emergency alert through Sentinel protocol. No phone call, no noise, just a silent beacon that pinged every veteran within 25 miles. Then she gave the command. Echo. Blitz. Deploy. The dogs shot out of the house like shadows with teeth, not wild, not barking, just silent, lethal precision. They split. Blitz circled behind the group while Echo flanked right, still invisible in the darkness, still unseen. Whitmore didn't notice until Blitz took down the man holding the gas can. A precise bite to the wrist, non-lethal, but disabling. The man hit the ground hard, screaming. The others turned in chaos. That's when Ava stepped onto the porch. Spotlight on. Rifle slung but untouched. Voice clear. Federal investigation active. You are trespassing. Drop your weapons now. Whitmore didn't drop his weapon. He raised it, but before he could fire, a second growl erupted. Echo, lunging from the side. She didn't bite, just drove into his legs, knocking him backward, gun flying into the mud. Suddenly, headlights appeared from the road. One of the Sentinel trucks peeled forward fast, horn blaring. Doors opened. 3 more veterans emerged, none of them cradling a shotgun. No words. Just presence. Whitmore scrambled to his feet, soaked, bruised, humiliated. "This is self-defense," he screamed. "She's out of control." But no one listened. Not the veterans. Not Ava. Not Echo and Blitz, still guarding with eerie calm. And certainly not Officer Logan Pierce, who arrived next, face battered, breath short. "They attacked me at home," he gasped. "Tried to shut me up." His voice cracked. "My wife and baby were inside." That was the final blow. Because now it wasn't just about Ava. It wasn't even about land. It was about justice. And survival. Within minutes, flashing blue and red filled the road again, but this time, it was state police, not Whitmore's cronies. They took over, secured the suspects, and placed Whitmore and his team under arrest. Attempted arson, conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with federal evidence, and obstruction of justice. Ava stood in the middle of it all, silent, still. Blitz pressed to her right leg. Echo sat to her left, alive, unshaken, unbroken. She looked up at the sky, dark, quiet, but above her, a storm had passed. And it wasn't Ava who burned. By sunrise, Ava Carter's quiet farm had become the epicenter of a multi-agency investigation. Crime scene tape flapped in the wind. FBI jackets moved between barns and tool sheds. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning for thermal signatures just in case any part of the attack had been remotely coordinated. And Charles Whitmore? He was sitting in the back of a black SUV, handcuffed, silent, and pale. His empire had collapsed overnight. But Ava knew better than to celebrate. Not yet. Because in America, the system rarely crumbled all at once. It cracked, piece by piece, until enough people forced it open. Federal Agent Michael Grant, lean and sharp-eyed, approached Ava just after 7 a.m. "We've reviewed the footage," he said.
There's no question. This was premeditated. He meant to destroy evidence and possibly kill you. Ava simply nodded. She didn't need the confirmation. She'd already lived it. What about his connections? She asked. Grant nodded toward a laptop a nearby agent was using. We've traced a web of financial transactions tied to a development fund. Shell corporations, off-book donations to the Willow Creek Police Benevolent Fund, and unregistered campaign contributions to local officials. He paused. We think this goes far beyond just Whitmore and Ellis. Ava folded her arms. Of course it did. Men like Whitmore were just the enforcers. The real corruption wore suits, not badges. Julian Carter, her attorney, joined them with fresh documents in hand. The county prosecutor's moving fast, he said. They're issuing warrants for Police Chief Raymond Ellis and 2 city council members who greenlit the resort project. About time, Ava muttered. Naomi Blake arrived with her cameraman, eyes wide as she took in the scene. You okay? She asked Ava. I'm standing, Ava said. Then let's make this count, Naomi replied. She turned to camera and began speaking live on air. We're here at the rural farm of Ava Cartera, decorated Marine veteran who last night survived an attempted arson attack allegedly orchestrated by the very police officials she accused of corruption just days ago. Her voice rang out over the valley and beyond. Because now, this wasn't just local news. Major networks were picking it up. Social media had already dubbed it #the Carter Files. Across the country, people were sharing Ava's story. Black veterans, farmers, single mothers, whistleblowers, people who knew what it meant to be targeted, not for what they'd done, but for who they were and what they refused to give up. By afternoon, the FBI had raided Willow Creek City Hall. They recovered internal memos outlining pressure tactics on landowners, emails from real estate developers to Ellis requesting quiet clearances, and surveillance logs from patrol cars ordered to harass specific addresses. Sheriff Richard Cole, still overseeing the outer perimeter at Ava's farm, got the call just after 4 p.m. He hung up and approached Ava with a look she hadn't seen on him before. Respect, and maybe even relief. They got him, he said. Ellis is in custody. The mayor too. Ava nodded, then asked quietly, what about the landowners? Cole smiled faintly. We're calling them in, every one of them. Full review of every citation, every inspection, every ticket. Julian added, we're drafting a civil suit. Class action. This could become the largest civil rights case this state has seen in a decade. Ava looked out toward her garden, the rows still scarred from boot prints, the shed where they tried to destroy her name, the flagpole where the American flag had fallen now raised again by one of the veterans standing watch. And she whispered to herself, they came to silence me. But now, they'll have to hear us all. Echo sat at her heel. Blitz scanned the horizon. And behind them, the system cracked open just enough for justice to squeeze through. It began quietly. A form, a signature, a knock on the door from someone holding a clipboard, not a weapon. But within 2 weeks, it became a movement. The civil rights lawsuit Ava Carter and her attorney Julian Filden
behalf of every landowner who had been harassed, displaced, or intimidated quickly gained momentum. By the end of the month, over 40 plaintiffs had joined. Some had stories even Ava hadn't heard. A widowed grandmother fined for unpermitted crops when she tried to grow tomatoes. A black pastor threatened with arrest for public disturbance after holding an outdoor funeral on his own land. A young couple denied a construction permit 5 times, then offered a quiet buyout by a resort developer. This wasn't random. It was systemic. And now, it was heading to court, federal court, under civil rights statutes, under anti-corruption laws, and under the weight of public opinion, now fully awake and watching. Inside the temporary war room Julian set up in a local church basement, Ava reviewed documents, statements, evidence logs. She wasn't just the face of the case anymore, she was its center. Grace Howard, the county prosecutor who had taken up the investigation personally, joined her in the makeshift office one afternoon. "You know what's at stake here," Grace said. Ava looked up from a stack of affidavits. "I know they'll try to settle," Grace nodded. "And I know you won't let them make this quiet." Ava folded her arms. "If they bury this under money, it'll just happen again 5 counties over." "That's why we're not just pushing for damages," Julian added. He held up a fresh draft of the civil complaint. "We're attaching demands for structural reform." Grace smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile people wear when they win. It was the kind they wear when they realize they might be part of something bigger than themselves. By mid-month, sentiment in Willow Creek had changed. The same people who once looked away when Ava walked into town now nodded. Some offered quiet thank yous at the gas station. Veterans she'd never met stopped by with stories of their own. And at night, outside her farmhouse, the floodlights were no longer just for security. They were symbols of resilience, of truth, of exposure. Local news called her the quiet force, but the national networks had a different name. The veteran who fought the Second War at home. When the day of the first court hearing arrived, Ava didn't wear a suit. She wore her marine dress blues, not for show, but because the same country that trained her to fight had tried to forget her when she came home. She stepped out of the truck beside Julian. Echo and Blitz stayed at her side, vests clean, movements calm. Inside the courthouse steps, reporters gathered. Naomi Blake was there, of course, now a national correspondent. She asked the first question as Ava approached the microphone. "Miss Carter, what do you hope comes from today's hearing?" Ava didn't blink. She looked straight at the camera. Accountability, transparency, and a message. You can't silence people just because they know the law and refuse to be afraid of it. Behind her, the plaintiffs gathered. Dozens of them, different ages, different backgrounds, same pain. But now, one voice. And as the courthouse doors opened, Ava stepped inside. Not as a victim, not as a witness, but as a leader of a fight far bigger than her own. 6 months later, the courthouse looked different. The same marble steps, the same stone columns. But now it stood for something more. The federal trial had ended. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Charles Whitmore, Raymond Ellis, and 6 others tied to the property harassment ring, convicted of civil rights violations, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and attempted murder. The court ordered millions in restitution to victims, but more importantly, it ordered reform. Mandatory body cameras on all Willow Creek officers. Independent civilian oversight of police conduct. Full audit of every property seizure in the last 5 years. And a freeze on the Pine River Resort development, pending environmental and ethical review. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for Ava Carter, that mattered. Because for the first time in her life after war, after silence, after being told to stand down, someone had listened. On the courthouse steps,
Ava stood in front of microphones once again, not as a protester, not as a survivor, but as the voice of a growing national coalition. Behind her stood veterans, farmers, teachers, activists, and dozens of people who once thought they were alone. She wore a navy blue blazer, her medals pinned just above her heart. At her feet, Echo and Blitz sat calmly, vests polished, eyes alert. She spoke softly, but every word landed with weight. This fight was never about one woman. It was about what happens when systems are left unchecked, when power forgets its duty, and silence becomes survival. She paused. But silence is no longer an option. The crowd erupted in applause, not thunderous, but long and steady, like the slow beat of justice finally catching up to the truth. In the months that followed, Ava launched the Carter Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting veterans, protecting vulnerable landowners, and training service animals for survivors of trauma. Echo and Blitz became symbols not of force, but of defense. Schools invited Ava to speak about civic courage. Community leaders from other counties asked for help creating their own watchdog networks. And Sentinel Protocol? It expanded to 12 states, staffed by volunteers, veterans, and retired law enforcement officers determined to make sure no one ever stood alone again. One evening, Ava walked through her garden. The tomato rose had regrown. The shed was rebuilt. The flag flew higher. She knelt by the soil and planted a fresh seedling. Blitz trotted beside her, tail swaying. Echo watched the tree line, ever vigilant. Julian joined her moments later, holding a file. "The mayor of Ridge County wants to meet," he said. "They've had complaints similar to yours. You up for it?" Ava looked up, smiled. "I was made for this." She wasn't chasing justice anymore. She was planting it. Later that night, in a quiet moment on the porch, Ava sat between her dogs, a cup of tea in her hand. The sky above stretched wide and dark, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel threatening. It felt open. Echo rested her head on Ava's knee. Blitz curled at her feet. And as crickets sang in the grass, Ava whispered not to them, not to the stars, but to herself. We held the line. And now, they were building something stronger. In a world that often rewards silence and punishes truth-tellers, Ava Carter's story reminds us that integrity is not about comfort, it's about courage. Especially as we age, it's tempting to withdraw from the chaos, to believe that battles for justice are for younger folks. But sometimes, the greatest impact comes not from noise, but from quiet resilience, from simply refusing to look away. Ava didn't start out trying to be a hero. She just knew something was wrong, and she trusted her instincts. Like many older Americans, she carried wisdom from a life of service, and that wisdom, combined with patience and principle, became her strength. Her journey tells us that it's never too late to stand for what's right, to use our voice, and to protect what we love, our land, our values, our community. No matter your age, you can still plant seeds that others will grow under. You can still light the path when others are afraid of the dark, because truth doesn't retire, and neither should courage. Let Ava's story be a reminder. You're never too old to make a difference,